Hello again and welcome. Michael Pizzolla here. I'd like to welcome you to the video which I'm calling Stop Betting Slow Horses. It's about the Fulcrum Pace. And I've been wanting to make this video for quite some time. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the Fulcrum, so I want to set that straight. I want to talk to you about, well, how to set a Fulcrum Pace, what to do with it, what it's meant to be, and what it's meant not to be, what its purpose was, how it came about. So there are a lot of things I kind of want to set the record straight about. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Pizzolla. I have been teaching and writing about this game for the past 35 years. I'm the author of the best-selling handicapping book, Handicapping Magic, co-author of the classic Pace Makes the Race. I am the creator of the original online racing forum and the designer of the culmination of all that work, the ValueCapper software and training. Whew. And what I do really is I help horse players and handicappers succeed in the modern game by adopting a value-oriented approach so that they can overcome overwhelm and confusion and focus on increasing their return on investment. Unlike, those who teach you how to pick winners in this particular race and this spot, I teach players to find good value bets. Betting if there is value or an overlay in the race, passing if there isn't, and adopting a more stress-free investment attitude. All right, with that being said, before I get into the nuts and bolts of the Fulcrum, I want to set a context, okay? Because in any area of learning, in any field, there are different levels, and in value capping, it's no different. Value capping is what I call handicapping, which is done with the purpose of finding good value plays. So the bedrock principles are the value capping framework, and from that comes certain strategies. From those strategies comes specific tactics. And by the way, the Fulcrum Pace is one of those tactics. Finally, there's technique, which is putting that into practice. And at the end of all of that, you get results. You get good results, not so good results, but there will be results. Now, and again, this goes in any field of learning, they want to start here. They want to start at the tactics part, right? Yeah, framework, bet horses you like, the public should. Yeah, I get that. And the strategy, we want to be intelligently contrarian. Yeah, whatever. Show me how to set a fulcrum. Show me how to set up the pace of the race. Show me how to find horses coming to a race. Without that underlying foundation, it's not going to do you any good. I'm just going to tell you that. I'll talk a little more about this further in the video. The Fulcrum is not a spot play. And I have the numbers to back that up and show you what it's about. Okay, so I should have... So the value capping framework, and those of you who watch my work have heard this a million times. It's to bet horses you like that the public shouldn't, preferably running against vulnerable favorites. You wait for your price, and you let the bet make you, or get a felt sense of the bet. That's underlying. Now, one value capping technique, or tactic, if you will, is the Fulcrum Pace. It can point to horses that may be compromised by the pace, even if they have marginally faster final time numbers. And why that's so good is that the pools, in my opinion, are still dominated by final time speed handicapping, speed numbers, which are good. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing that at all. But you'll once in a while see a horse with decent final time numbers, but are compromised by the pace of the race. And there are horses that may have an advantage based on the pace of the race against which they've run, even though their final time numbers are marginally slower. So, and for that lovely fellow who sent me one of those emails or messages, I forget in what format he sent, but he was telling me about how I was all wrong and how I was calculating the fulcrum pace. And, it took a bit of restraint to be a gentleman about this, but I had to remind him that since I kind of came up with it, not kind of, this is my baby, and I've been in print with it for a long time, that maybe I kind of had an idea of how to do it. So this is that book I was telling you about before, Pace Makes the Race. And this was copyrighted in, oh gosh, I think I wrote this in 1990. Yeah, it was, I don't know if the camera will focus on that, but copyrighted in 1991. That's 30 years ago. And there's a chapter on page 102 called The Fulcrum. Using and selecting a fulcrum pace. And this was back in the days I was working with the Perco group. Oh, look at that. This is my signed edition, signed by all 4 of the authors, which is very cool to have. I had one of these, and I've lost it. And you know how things go, books with moves and things like that. So one of my I'm very fond of this client. His name is Terry, and he asked me to sign the book, and then he handed it to me with all the signatures on it to replace the one that I had lost. Anyway, sorry to digress. The definition of the fulcrum pace from page 103 of Pace Makes the Race. The fulcrum pace is the fastest second call pace among the last pace lines or running lines of all the horses in the race, provided that, number 1, the horse was competitive at both the second call and the finish, and number 2, the pace is not atypically fast for that horse. Now, you'll please excuse my legal background. I am, after all, a recovering attorney, practiced many years ago. And so this is, done almost like a clause in a legal document. There was a little 1 and 2, and some awkward phrases like not atypically fast. Okay, there's a reason for that. The language is precise. Now, there's a second or same definition, and this is from Handicapping Magic, which was published in the year 2000, 21 years ago, so 10 years or so after. Chapter 4 is Pace Makes the Race and the Fulcrum Makes the Pace. Okay, and I gave a definition, page 61, pretty early in the book. The fulcrum pace is the fastest second call time of all the contestants in the race, taken from their last race, provided that the race is competitive and not atypically fast for the horse. Okay. Same thing. It's been consistent over all of these years. Almost immediately, after I started teaching it back, even before Pace Makes the Race was published, after Pace Makes the Race was published, after Handicapping Magic was published, this happened. People's hair caught fire. What are you talking about? You know nothing about pace. You take it from the last race? What are you, an idiot? You use raw times? What? Moron. Believe me, I've heard it all. You can't, when you put yourself out in a game that has so many passionate opinions, you're going to hear that. But boy, oh boy. And it's because, not anyone's fault, it's because of the culture and the techniques that were being used where I was teaching in the Perco group Um, the techniques that were being used would sometimes lead the users of that software and those approaches to consider slower horses to be contenders. So, and by the way, I've been asked so many. I've been asked two things. I think more than just about anything else. Michael, can you talk about the fulcrum? We've heard you talk about that in the videos, and could you also talk a little bit about Perco and all of that? All I can tell you is I have very, very fond memories of that. Um, those of you who have seen subsequent editions of Pace Makes the Race, where my contribution was, taken out. I, I was, we parted because I made, I, I really didn't realize what I was doing was frowned upon, but I was actually handicapping, running through software races. Now, wait a minute, this is going to seem outrageous to you. Before the race was run, which is generally the way it goes. And I was told, no, people will lose faith in the method and so forth. And I thought, well, is it really, the method is it really about faith, or is it about, hey, this is calls I made. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. And so there was a little bit of a difference of opinion. But in that group, the emphasis was on selecting a group of contenders. And then once you got those contenders, a pace line was selected for each contender. Now, that data was analyzed by computer software. Here's the big challenge with that. That software, at the time, was used to make subtle distinctions among horses. And some of the software applied very big adjustments to the horse's lines. In fact, there was one software that took all the lines, all the running lines, all the fractional times, and adjusted them to a constant. So in other words, one horse could have run against a pace of 45, and another horse could have run against 48. And once you made that horse with a 48 a contender, it brought them all together and it looked like, it had a real chance in the race, which sometimes it really didn't. So the numbers were so massaged that if you put in a slow horse, it could look like a world beater. And this was an issue, and I had a lot of people come to me when I was teaching saying, God, I don't understand. The program brought this horse up, and it was like, that's a slow horse. Stop betting slow horses. And there was another teacher there who taught about matching up races, but to be frank, it was a little complicated, and I'm pretty good at this stuff, and I couldn't really follow all the way. And so I wanted to develop a simple approach to eliminating those slow horses. Horses that may have difficulty running against the probable pace of the race. So the purpose, listen to me please, the purpose of the Fulcrum Pace was not to project the actual pace of the race. I have techniques for that. There's something called acupressure, which is built into the ValueCapper software, which looks at every fraction in every line on every horse in the race and does a series of very sophisticated and complicated projections based on not only just velocity, but also their positional tendencies as well. It can be done by hand, and some of my past Kentucky Derby videos, I've demonstrated a rather basic method of doing that. But really, to get it very accurately, like acupressure does, it really needs some number crunching. Otherwise, you spend all day on one race. Okay. So it wasn't meant to project the actual pace of the race, although sometimes it does, and it's uncanny in that. But that wasn't the purpose. And most importantly, I want you to hear this. It was not meant to be a spot play in all races. Otherwise, I would say it's the fulcrum spot. You find this, and then and then it's another system. The purpose of the fulcrum pace was and is to eliminate horses that probably, because we don't know for sure, but probably, based on the evidence in front of us, could not meet the pace of the race. And before those horses were entered into computer software. In other words, if you put in slow horses and adjust them enough, you can get them to look like Man of War. So these days it's a little different, and very, very few players manually enter data into software. Post Time Daily, which is our online racing forum, of course you just download the data. And ValueCapper, you just download the data. All the numbers are calculated. All the running lines are selected, and there are different modes that you can use, although the defaults is something called the ValueCapper mode. Oh, big surprise and clever naming, Michael. Yeah, well, that's what it is, because I research every last nuance of this to get every last bit of accuracy and reliability that I can. And in those days, software was not capable of doing what software today does because it was limited by the hardware. For gosh sakes, when I first started, I was doing things on a calculator. And I would run numbers for every horse in every line of the Eastern edition of the daily racing form without fail. I wouldn't let myself go to sleep unless that was done. I can't tell you how tedious that was. Then there was a big step forward when we had these little programmable calculators. That was helpful. And then the Commodore 64. I don't remember really the sequence, but let me tell you, those were pioneer days. My first laptop was a Toshiba, which had a 20 megabyte. I'm not misspeaking. A 20 megabyte hard drive, and it was like, oh my gosh. And it was only $2,000. I didn't want to spring for the $4,000, and that one had a 40 megabyte hard drive. I know it's hard to believe now that we crunch, gigabyte files like they're nothing. So one of the impetuses that I wanted to correct, well, one of the impetuses rather for making this video, player approached me at the race book and said, "Hey, you're Michael Pizzolla." I said, "Yeah, how you doing?" He said, "I got to tell you, I've been using the Fulcrum and I'm like not getting good results with it." I said, "Oh, how are you using it?" He said, "Well, I'm just betting the Fulcrum horse." I said, "Well, it's not a spot play." I said, "So what are you doing? How are you getting the Fulcrum horse?" He said, "Well, I look at all the horses' races. I find the fastest second call time that a horse has, and then I look at all those times and I find the fastest one of all of them. So the fastest second call that any horse has ever run." Then he adjusted it by some variants, and that, he said, was the Fulcrum Pace. That's how you get the Fulcrum Pace. And I had to tell him, I said, "No, it's really not." Okay? I get sent emails and messages all the time explaining to me what the Fulcrum Pace is. I'm not a big one other than our Wizards forum, which is a group of my private coaching group, my clients who use Blackmagic 1 or ValueCapper. Other than that, I don't spend a lot of time on internet boards and all because I don't find a lot of the discussions very useful. But once in a while, one of my clients will send me something and say, "Hey, look what this fellow is saying the Fulcrum Pace is about." And it's okay. Some of those techniques may actually work. It's just not what the original Fulcrum is about. So they may be sound. It's just not the Fulcrum Pace. So I wanted to correct that information. So nuts and bolts, how to set the Fulcrum Pace. It's so simple. You look at every last race for every horse. Okay. You start with the fastest second call from all the horses' last races. So those of you who are really newbies, second call is the 4 furlong call in a sprint and the 6 furlong call in a rout. Now, you can't really do this if there are no internal times. 5 furlong races are a little wonky. The 6 furlong, 7 furlong, 6.5 furlong, that's fine. You find a pace. Those numbers will look like 45 seconds, 46 seconds, 47 seconds, and so forth. And similarly with a route, a mile, mile 16th, mile and an eighth, mile 70, mile 40. That number in the middle will be the 6 furlong time. 111 and 2, 112, 113, and so forth. So for this purpose, we do not use the pace of, or when we're first finding it, we just look at the pace of the race. So here's the second call. Oh, it's a 45 and 2. Great. Now, we take that pace of the race and we add, take a deep breath now. Take a deep breath, 1/5 of a second for each length the horse was behind at the second call. And look, I know that those are two different measurements. One's time, right? And one's distance. And really, is a 1/5 of a second equal to a length? And really, it should be a 1/6 of a second? So yeah, I've been through all those calculations. This is a rough and ready approximation. Remember what it was for. It was to avoid people betting slow horses. Now, you may ask why the second call? Well, consider that in a 6 furlong race, the second call is measured at 4 furlongs. 4/6, 2/3, that's 2/3 of the race is over. And similarly, at a mile and an eighth, let's say, the second call is measured at 6 furlongs. That's 6 furlongs out of the 9 furlongs. That's 2/3 of the race. And you could do the different maths if you like fractions and you remembered your 4th grade mathematics class. It's a big part of the race. That was part of it. The other, aside from it being 2/3 of the race and 6 furlongs, and actually it's larger than that. That meant to say mile and an eighth. Actually, 6/8 is 3/4 of the race in a mile. In other words, the 6 furlong call at a mile, right, is 6 furlongs out of the 8 furlongs. 6/8 is 3/4, or 75% of the race. But I had a series of conversations with Huey Ma, and I felt myself very fortunate to do is one over the course of one summer. And I remember in just about every conversation, he emphasized the second call. He called it the linchpin to pace handicapping, and that stuck with me. So when I came up with this technique, that's where I started. So look, I'm not going to give you charts and show you past performance because this is 101, okay? If a horse ran against a 45-second call and he was 3 lengths behind at that call, then we're going to say the second call time would be 45 and 3. Oh, you can't do that. You can't just add the lengths to fifths. Yeah, I know. Just stop. This is rough and ready, okay? After you get the fastest second calls, you do that for all the horses. 45 and 3, 46 and 1, 47. The 45-3 is the fastest. You check to see if that horse was competitive in the race from which it earned that fastest second call time. Roughly. Again, this is not a spot play or a system. This is all built into my software, so I hardly look at the mechanics of it anymore. But roughly, you want it to be beaten no more than 5 lengths or 5 lengths or less at both the second call and the finish, right? Because you don't want a horse that, let's say, ran against a 44 second call in 6 furlongs, and he's running against other horses that are running, let's say, 47, and maybe that 44, he's 10 lengths back. 10 lengths, 10/5, 2 seconds, that's a 46. All of a sudden, you're setting him as a fulcrum, when really he just lagged behind the field. So you want him to be competitive. roughly, beaten by 5 lengths or less at both the second call and the finish. So if it passes the competitive test, then you test for aberrancy. This is that not atypical, very lawyerly language, but forgive me. You want to see if it's if it only ran that number once. Okay, so if it doesn't pass the competitive test, you go to the next horse and you look at it, and then it's also got to pass the aberrancy test. You want to see if it's. It doesn't need to be the typical second call time the horse runs, but I just don't want it to be atypical. So if the horse, example, race at the top, the horse runs a 45 and 1 second call, and then you look at all the other second calls, it's 47, 46 and 4. Yeah. I don't want to set a fulcrum pace that's too fast. Okay? So because if you do, and you're requiring that the horses run to that pace, if you set it too fast, you'll be eliminating a lot of horses that may have a shot, certainly to get into the exotics. So we're not requiring in this aberrancy test that the horse runs that second call all the time. Just that it's faced it or close to it and run well. Run well, I don't know, within 5 lengths at the finish, let's say. But use your judgment. Make up your own numbers. It's fine. This is just a rough and ready thing that I did to avoid the people with whom I was sharing this from betting slow horses. So a rule of thumb, if a horse has done well running against a faster pace, obviously that's fine. I don't want to get much more than 2/5 of a second slower than the fulcrum pace. So in other words, if today's fulcrum pace is 45, and the horse has only done well against 45.3, 45.4, I don't consider it really viable. Now again, there are adjustment issues. There are all kinds of things that can come into it. And, if it's that close, I may take a second look. But generally, if a horse hasn't run well. Now, if you're dealing with lightly raced horses, well, of course, you may not have enough evidence to go on. And some people will say, well, yeah, but most past performances, they only last the last 10 races. Well, that's plenty. If it's an average of 2 weeks for time between each race, that's 20 weeks of time. That's 4 months. That's enough to see if relatively recent it's run that. Guess what, Michael? I see here that back in 1927, well, you get the idea. So, again, if we set a fulcrum pace that's too fast, we could eliminate legitimate contenders. That's why I err on being conservative. That's why I use the last running line, because it's again, forgive the legalese, it's the best evidence we have of the horse's form and condition. Now, there are all kinds of other things that go into this, all kinds of other tactics, strategies, techniques that go into seeing if the horse will run to that or run better than that. But if we set a fulcrum horse that's too fast, a fulcrum pace that's too fast, we could eliminate legitimate contenders. By the way, there's not a fulcrum in every race. Sometimes no horse in the race will pass the competitive and aberrancy test. In that case, make a note of this. There's no fulcrum pace in the race. Okay? Now, like that fellow who went and found the fastest second call time of all the horses and all the races, and fine, I'm not saying it was working for him. It didn't seem to be working. He didn't seem to be very, very happy with me for coming up with that technique, which I never came up with, by the way. So if you don't have a fulcrum, you don't have a fulcrum. Back in the day when we talked about pace, balance, speed numbers, the PBS numbers, I told them to set a constant. But that's subject for another discussion. Now, what do? I got the fulcrum pace, Mikey. Now what? Okay. Simply, you eliminate from win consideration horses that haven't run well in races that are at or near the fulcrum pace. Pretty simple. And unless you've got something like, a horse coming to Belmont from a much slower track, I'm not going to, whatever, pick from Will Rogers Downs, and maybe there's a huge adjustment thing and so forth, but that's a general rule of thumb if you're trying to narrow down the competition. Now, once in a while, you'll see a horse with a very nice fulcrum pace, competitive in that race, not atypical, and no other horse can run well against that pace. This is the one case where I say it's not a bad little spot play. However, two things. It's exceedingly rare because trainers generally know where to put their horses. They can read a form. They have access to good pace and speed numbers for the most part, right? And by the way, unlike back in the day, the prices on these horses tend to be very short. The public has gotten better. Again, I've been talking about this Fulcrum Pace for 30 years. Someone may have listened, and look at them. But let me show you. By the way, and I wish I knew why this was, but Fulcrum horse seems to sneak into the exotics, especially the exacta, a bunch, and the trifecta. I don't have a good explanation for why that is. Okay? It's a mystery to me. People say, Michael, this Fulcrum is pretty spiffy. I like to use it underneath. I always like to use it in my exotics. Don't know why. I was just telling you, I came up with it. Don't know why. I'll still look at it. I said, Michael, you have to have that one. No, I bet these other horses in the exotic. Well, that was the Fulcrum. I said, gosh. Now, the Fulcrum is in big, bold letters in the ValueCapper software. You can't miss it. And once in a while I will, because you can't cover every combination in exotics, but every time as it comes in, I want to slap my forehead. Let me show you some database runs, and this is what I love. So in my private coaching groups, I'm going to play, well, I use this particular rating, and I've done pretty well over the past 2 months, where there have been about 15 or 16 different instances of this. And I'm thinking, 15 or 16? Come on, you're kidding me, right? Or, this Fulcrum doesn't work, and, I don't know, it's only got a few winners in the last 25 races. I was like, what? Here's a database run I did just a little while ago. We've got, here at Post Time and ValueTech, we've got a pretty big database. Let's just leave it at that. I asked it to analyze 223,789 races. That's a lot of races. That's more than I bet the top earnings horse only on the turf and the last 15 races, and I'm, please. Every last nuance, every little strategy, tactic, technique that's built into ValueCapper is based on this kind of research. Make a little tweak, see which one works better. Make another little tweak, see which one works better. I mean, I think the first go-round, it was, 2,500 plus iterations of the software making all these changes. It took years. And that's once the basics were all in place with Black Magic. It was a huge jump. Anyway, so there were 50,000 wins, rounding, 40,000 places, right? And 33,000 shows. That's 22.4% win percentage and almost 56% in the money percentage. You can do the math for the 40,000 over 22,000. What is that? Please, my brain is going here. Anyway, it's a little less than the win. It's a little more than the win, a little less than the win play show. This is every race at every track in which there was a fulcrum. Okay? Didn't care about class of the race. distance of the race, anything. This was all thrown in, including slow horses. Now, once in a while, a Fulcrum could be a slow horse because that last race may be really good and other horses may have back races that are a lot better. This is why it's not a spot play, okay? And yet I see results like this and I'm surprised. Now, when you limit the Fulcrum, looking at just those Fulcrums where the Fulcrum horse is competitive in the race, and let's say above random, okay? So random means if there are 9 horses in the race, random is 8-1, right? Because you put nine balls, nine red balls, or 8 red balls in a hat with 1 white ball. There's 9 balls. The odds of picking out that 1 is 8. 8 losing red balls to 1 winning white ball. Okay, so that's random, 8-1. It's 1 less than the number of horses in the race. So if you limit it to that, or back in the day, we would just say limit it to the top 5 or 6 contenders or whatever. But this run was done where it was above random. It knocked down that 220,000 races to 180,000, roughly 179,555. The win percentage went up to 25%, which is just like remarkable based on like a relatively mechanical thing. And the in the money percentage, in other words, this horse was going to win, place, or show 60% of the time. Again, this is a little more than a 15, 20, 30 race workout. Why, you did it for a month? Yeah, well, good. Okay, this is this is 10 years of data, maybe a little more. So I'm confident that the fundamentals of the Fulcrum are valid, and it's borne out by these kinds of databases run. Now, here's the catch with database research, and people get so frustrated with it, and I understand. Why can't, you may ask, I just push a button, put all of this in, let's see if your numbers go, what's the top number, and how does that come out in the race over a couple of 100,000 races? Why don't I show a profit on that? Because computers are, the ones we have now, at least until the, whatever they call it, what do the millennials call it? The singularity comes, or when we become part machine. But for now, these computers, whatever, we usually point to our brain, right? But it's really this whole thing, whatever it is. These computers are so much more powerful and make connections. And it will be able, we can, by looking at a race, be able to discern the uniqueness of a race. Every race is unique. There is not another point in time where this collection of horses, at this point in their form cycles, right, are coming together to run. Next time, even it could be the same horses. Some horses will have improved in that last race, some declined, some have had trouble, and so forth and so on. And I don't think I've ever seen the same group of horses run in 2 consecutive races. Every race is unique, but database doesn't know that. Database, you tell it, find me the Fulcrum, see if it won, or placed or finished third. Find me the top master pace number from ValueCapper and see if that won. Now, which one do I pick? Well, try the top one, try the best, try the second, and on and on and on. And that's why, if you've ever tried to do your own database and research like that, it can be frustrating because it doesn't respect the uniqueness of each race. So please remember, even though I showed you these statistics, the Fulcrum Pace, the Fulcrum Technique, the Fulcrum Tactic, if you will, which is a little more accurate, was never designed to be a spot play. Otherwise, the chapter in the book would have said, bet these Fulcrum horses. That's not what it was, okay? It's not a spot play. It's not meant to be an automatic play. Now, in my personal work, sorry, I've gotten a little lazy, if you will. All of this is done by software. Not lazy. We need better tools to compete against a much sharper public. The public who is now um, armed with better numbers, because idiots like me put this all in print, not just the Fulcrum, but other more sophisticated numbers and so forth, and shared this. And not just me, but, people, well, you've read all the books, you know what I mean. And then this little thing called the internet came along. And of course, it came out with the online racing forum with some very decent pace numbers and very decent advanced speed ratings. And then you had the online. And when I originally did the online racing forum, it was in partnership with the Daily Racing Forum. And we had the Beyer numbers. And I still bless Andy Beyer for allowing us to do that. It was a big step for him because his numbers were never online before that. That was back in 1994, 1995. And they've since gone their own way, and they got purchased, and they went one way, and we went with the Equibase data and so forth. The point is, there was this massive proliferation of data. And anyone with a laptop or an iPad or a tablet or, could have access to this, which when I started seriously in this work, I mean, what if I think of what 1985 Michael would have thought about if he saw this stuff? It would be like, what, did aliens come down from another planet and design this? So we are dealing with a much more sophisticated public. Okay. So I use software. The software indicates, of course, the Fulcrum Pace. Almost all the software I've ever done has it all sets the Fulcrum Pace. So I don't have to worry about it. Would I make a little wriggle room sometimes? Well, yeah, I'm not really crazy about that 46 and 1. Yeah. But frankly, I'm looking at between 90 and 150 races in the course of a day. I just don't have time to do all that fine work in every race. Once in a while I will, if a race looks like it's got a potential to have a value bet in it. So I'm very selective about where I do my work. So if I stumble a little bit, forgive me when I did this little math, okay, because I simply don't do it. The software does it. So ValueCapper then uses the Fulcrum, uses many other things, and I think the most sophisticated pace numbers certainly out there. They've been developed, and literally I spent 20 years of my life on the numbers. This is not to pitch you on the software. I got plenty of people who use it, and just about as many as I can handle coaching. But if you want to learn more, especially about the foundational principles of value capping, just go to ValueCapper.com and you'll see this beautiful picture of me pointing to something. I must have been making a very important point at that seminar. But there's something called the Value Capping Revolution Basic Training Course. You just click on it, you put in your first name, your email. We don't spam you. We send you a series of 4 videos. You get the first one right away. The next one come every 2 days in your email inbox. And you'll learn a lot. Even if you're not interested in software remotely, the talking about how shifting your focus from picking winners to finding value plays, I think you'll find very, very useful. And here's something I've learned to do. And don't laugh. If you're under 40 years old, don't you dare laugh. But I just started doing this just a couple of videos ago. If you liked this video and you got some value out of it, please consider clicking the like button. And if you want to see more and be notified, you can click the subscribe button. Now, I'm pointing, but I don't really know where those buttons are because I'm a boomer, okay? I know a little bit, but there's ways to make them come up on the screen and all, and it's like, okay, too much for me. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And I hope you have found this primer on the Fulcrum Pace. I hope you have a better understanding of what it was meant to do, what it was not meant to do, which is be a spot play, how it can help you keep away from betting slow horses, and a starting point. If you're working by hand or want to just look at a race and get away from a computer screen and just look, a starting point for your analysis of a race. So that's my 2 cents about the Fulcrum Pace, and you've heard it from the, if you will, pardon the analogy, from the horse's mouth. Is it an analogy or a metaphor? I don't know. But you've heard it from the horse's mouth because I came up with it. This is what it is. These are where they appeared first in print. Okay. And thank you for letting me rant a little bit about my baby, the Fulcrum Pace. Good luck at the races. I hope this finds you well and happy. Thank you so much for joining me. And until next time, remember, stay cool, calm, collected, and let the bet make you. I'll see you soon.